is that we all have this calling to genius inside ourselves. We want to operate in our genius zone. It's just something wired in as human beings. We want to be the very best we can be at the thing we're best at. And so to do that, you need to ask yourself a couple of big questions. And I started asking these questions, a long time ago, and it helped me weed out everything that wasn't in my genius zone. But one big question is, what do I most love to do? When I'm doing it, I feel complete. I feel satisfied. I feel at peace. I feel like my energy is being engaged. Some people call it being in the flow. But what it is basically is you're doing something you most love to do. The second factor to ask yourself is, am I doing something that has the largest possible impact?
Gay, you are very, very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. It is an absolute honor and privilege for me to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you so much, Brendan. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate you. You're an early riser anyway, about 6:30 in the morning. You've got your coffee. We're ready to go. Looking forward to a great conversation. We've been chatting off air. Our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small to medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So, Gay, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
In my own case, it had to do with finding out who I was first inside and what I was up to on this planet in my development inside here, because every entrepreneur, everybody is run by a committee, and you got to get all of your committee on board, and your committee is in your head, first of all. And so everybody, I think, needs to learn to open up to and discover their own inner resources and then bring them out into the world in the biggest possible way. And like, for example, my wife, Katie, and I write relationship books also, in addition to business books like The Big Leap. And when we first were on Oprah with our book, Conscious Loving, way back 30 years ago, it was the fulfillment of a dream, because we went from teaching the same material to 10 couples in our living room to teaching it in front of 10 million people on Oprah. And to me, that was so satisfying, because, like, if you have something you deeply believe in and have seen it's helpful to people, of course, you want to get it out to the biggest possible arena. One of my friends, Allison Maslin, is a kind of a specialist in scaling, and I talk to her a lot. And to me, it all starts, though, with what you're bringing inside to the whole enterprise.
That is such a wonderful answer, and there's so much in that. So we speak about scaling from the inside in order to actually scale on the outside. And essentially what I've heard is that find out who you are first and foremost, and that's doing the inner work. Silence the committee, the inner dialogue, which is often critical, to allow you to fully express your true self, your true giftedness, and bring that to the world. That is such a wonderful answer to that question. So let's dive into that, because I want to share a little bit of context with you. Okay, sadly, less than 1% of small to medium-sized enterprises are currently achieving scale. And in the UK alone, given the work of the Scale-Up Institute, scale-ups, there's 5.7 million SMEs. They contribute 2.3 trillion pounds worth of revenue to the UK economy, so more than half of the overall revenue. 1.3 trillion of that is coming from less than 26,000 companies, 0.5%. Now, lack of ambition of the leader is cited as the single greatest impediment as to why more SMEs are not achieving scale. So in your opinion, given the decades of work that you have conducted with founders, with entrepreneurs, with business leaders, what do you think is going on there?
I think that It reminds me of sometimes I give talks to groups like the Young Presidents Organization, where they're all under 50 and very entrepreneurial and very driven. But a lot of times when I touch on this subject that we're talking about here, starting from the inside out, I get a whole bunch of head shakes in the audience, like, oh man, that's touchy-feely stuff. You're talking about emotional resilience and things like that. What does that have to do with the bottom line? Whoa, I'll tell you, I've coached now close to 1,800 executives over the years, and it has everything to do with the bottom line. And, famously, I started out, one of my first clients was Michael Dell, and he's my great example of everything that's great about entrepreneurs. Because from the very beginning, I would go down there a lot to Austin in the 90s when they were in a period of explosive growth. And he and his other two top lieutenants, Kevin and Mort, I worked with them a lot. And one thing that was so, to me, obvious as to why Dell was succeeding at such a level is because all of the people were completely open to feedback. A lot of people, when you say, here's something that's not working, they'll clam up or withdraw or feel like they're under attack or close down in some way. But like I use Michael all the time as a great example of, he'll hear an idea, he'll think about it. Is this a useful thing for me? And then boom, he'll implement it 10 seconds later. He doesn't wait for 24 hours or to. And so I was so impressed by that, because to me, openness to learning is such a crucial thing. And if we can all go around in a state of being willing to learn and being open to learn the lessons that we most need to learn, then life itself becomes a journey. And if you're an entrepreneur, that's so useful, because sometimes you can make the biggest possible changes out in the world from a tiny change inside your world. I remember working with one of the executives at another big computer firm, and he was, the reason he consulted me was people on his team would get upset with him, and then it would take them several weeks to kind of get back into harmony again. And let me give you a very vivid example of why changing something inside can make an immediate difference throughout the company. As we were talking, it became clear that why people in his team got freaked out by him was that he would get into a rage and pound on the table and that kind of thing. And these were nice Midwestern people he was dealing with, and they freaked out at somebody behaving like that. Now, in his world, he grew up in a very, passionate Italian family where people yelled at each other throughout dinner and everything like that. And he thought it was kind of normal to blow up and then 10 seconds later forget about it. But I pointed out to him that his blow-ups were always not about anger. They were about sadness and disappointment about something. But he didn't know how to say, oh, I feel so disappointed right now, or oh, I was so counting on that. Instead, it was always, you stupid idiot, how could you be the stupidest vice president in the history of business? He would blow up like that for about 30 seconds, and then he'd be over it. But the other guy wouldn't be over it for a while, and so the work for him was learning how to come from a deeper place in himself, a place of vulnerability, rather than a kind of a tyrant fist waving kind of a guy. But making that change, I mean, it was so important, because throughout the business, suddenly everything was different, because people were not operating in a state of fear some of the times. Fear is the biggest thing that entrepreneurs have to deal with on their inner journey. A friend of mine called me a while back, and she's a big entrepreneur and a multi-million-dollar business that she started from scratch. And she told me about some problem she had. And I said to her, well, if you're an entrepreneur and your business is about to fall apart every 6 months, you're doing it right. If you're not doing that, you're not taking on a big enough project. And so I think part of the entrepreneurial project is learning how to be at home and be friends with sadness, anger, fear, all of those things that occur in our hearts and deep in our minds. And by doing that, then we can more better function in the outside world.
That is so profound, and I want to go a little bit deeper into this today. You know, there's a number of things that you've said, and certainly what I'm hearing is this ability, certainly in the context of the inner work, which it resonates with me when you start to talk about the inner work to entrepreneurs. So look, we're here to boost the top line and bottom line here of our business, sell more products, earn more profits. What is the inner work got to do with any of that? And what I'm hearing is this ability to actually feel and tune in to your emotional thermostat, to respond to situations instead of reacting, understanding that whilst you might get over that situation in moments, that can leave shrapnel in people that goes on for days, weeks, months, and actually silences their giftedness. The understanding that scaling with purpose is challenging by itself, and that you should be in this kind of constant state of discomfort, but actually it's being aware of that and getting used to that. Something you referenced right at the outset was your incredible book, and you've written scores of books, but The Big Leap, I have a defaced copy of The Big Leap. It's such an incredible book. I encourage, for those listening, you'll not be able to see me hold this up. I encourage you, go out and grab a copy if you haven't already read this. You talk about something, you use this phrase in relation to not fully being able to express our giftedness as an upper limit problem. Can you share with our listeners what you mean by that? Because whenever I heard this for the first time, I thought it was quite a strange term, and but as I got into the book and really started to internalize this, it makes so much sense.
Well, the upper limit problem is our tendency to sabotage ourselves when things are going well. And the reason we do that is for a couple of reasons. One is that a lot of us are walking around with limiting beliefs, some of which started way back in our original family that had a certain set of beliefs about what was possible in the world. And I grew up in a family where I don't know where I got my entrepreneurial streak from because there are no other entrepreneurs in the family. My mother was a newspaper columnist. My dad, when he was alive during his short 32 years on this planet, ran an orange packing company where in Florida there's a lot of oranges around and they have big plants that pack them. And that was what my dad did. But nobody was an entrepreneur. But I don't know, ever since I was a little kid, I always loved setting up little businesses. I was the kid with the lemonade stand on the corner. And I had my first big entrepreneurial breakthrough, though, because it speaks directly to the upper limit problem, was I got this idea when I was in the fifth grade, 10 years old here. And my next door neighbor was a watermelon broker, and he always kept a bunch of watermelons in his garage for neighbors that wanted to come over and buy one or something. And but he sold millions of watermelons, so it was just a favor having the watermelons in his garage. And I went over and I asked him one day if I could buy 4 of his watermelons, or they sold for 25 cents a piece. This is 1955. We're talking about when petrol was 25 cents a gallon, and so I never got more than $1 worth of gas in my car when I was a teenager. You know, it was like 4 gallons would get me out to my girlfriend's place and back. But anyway, so I took my watermelons down to the highway and I spent a hot Florida summer day trying to sell these watermelons. I had my sign 25 cents a watermelon, and I'd bought them for 15 cents. So if I sold four, I was going to go home a rich man. And I didn't sell a single one the first day. And I had to, and so my first big entrepreneurial slapdown was I didn't move any melons. And so I went back up the hill with my little wagon full of melons. And that night, though, I had an insight. Nobody wants to buy a whole watermelon. What I should do is cut them up into 8 slices and sell them for a nickel. Then I'm getting 40 cents a watermelon and I'm off the scale rich. Well, I didn't realize what a big insight that was, because the first day I sold out my watermelon and had to go back up the hill for more several times. So I ended up, and here's a great number to remember, $3.75 worth of profit at the end of the day. So you can imagine how many slices I had to peddle to do that. But your upper limit is your built-in sabotage mechanism. And so another good example was I used to be obese. I used to be overweight 50 years ago. And I discovered the secret to having a healthy body, and I started doing it, and I lost 35 pounds very quickly. The secret, I'll share it for you, is eat healthy things and get some exercise. Those were two facts that had somehow managed to escape me in my first 24 years of life. My idea of a good meal at the time was a cheeseburger and some chips and some what we would call a vanilla malt over here. I don't know what you guys call it in Europe, but it's ice cream mixed up with milk and
Beautiful.
malt and everything. So that was kind of my go-to lunch: cheeseburger, French fries, and a malt. And if you want to put 35 extra pounds on you in about a month, make that your daily diet. But anyway, I lost the weight. In about a month, I lost 35 pounds. I was walking down the street and I was feeling so good. I'd never felt better in my life, I don't think. And I looked over to my left into a window of an ice cream shop, and I saw a family of four eating this big gooey ice cream concoction with bananas on it and chocolate and all that. And I completely went unconscious, and I just went into that store after 35 days of eating great, perfect food. I went into that store and I bought one of those all for myself, and I ate most of it. And for about 20 minutes, when I was having my sugar rush, I felt like the king of the universe. 20 minutes later, I'm walking down the street and I got the worst stomach ache of my life. I was actually doubled over on the street. And some lady said, "Are you okay, sir? Are you okay?" But what had happened was up had come my fear of, I don't deserve to feel that good all the time. Some little part of me down there, and maybe some part of all of us, is convinced that we don't deserve the good things of life, that we don't deserve abundance and good health and success. And what I want everybody to look at, and people who come here to work with us to look at, is where are you operating out of limiting beliefs? Two of the most common ones are, I don't deserve abundance. I don't deserve success. I don't deserve the good things of life. I don't deserve love. Where did we get that little input? You can always go back and find a source point for it. Oftentimes in siblings, oftentimes in family, oftentimes. I happened to grow up with my grandparents next door, so I kind of had access to three generations. When I became a psychologist, I always say I became a psychologist at birth just to learn how to survive in a wacky Southern family. Go read a William Faulkner novel. That's my family. And I hope you don't have to do that in your schooling. But if you do, you'll know all about my Southern family. But it's based on another thing, too. The upper limit problem is always triggered by fear. So you're going along and I'm feeling better than I've ever felt in my life. And some little part of me says, "Oh my gosh, you don't deserve to feel that way. Retreat back to something more familiar." So I knew how to be fat. I'd been fat for a long time, but I didn't know how to be healthy and slender and in good health. And so that was a huge upper limit problem for me. And I began to study it though later on. And where I really started noticing when I was working on my PhD and when I finished my doctorate at Stanford and I stayed there for a year as a research psychologist. But kind of in my spare time, I was doing executive coaching because it was the same time back in the 70s when all of these amazing high tech firms were just getting underway. We had Hewlett Packard 3 miles away, and Apple wasn't there yet, but they would be invented in the next few years. And all of these great Intel chip company and all of that were right in the neighborhood. And so a lot of times the executives from there would be sent over to my counseling center to do some we used to call therapy, but we now call executive coaching. We don't say the T word anymore. But it was always the same issues. But here's the thing that would happen. Like one of my clients, big electronics firm, he'd been working on a machine for a couple of years, and a lot of money had been spent on this machine. And it was a very expensive machine, several $100,000 a piece. And it worked great, and they sold a ton of them. And one afternoon, his boss came in and said, "Here's a bonus in appreciation for what you've done on whatever the machine was." And at the time, my client was making about $170,000, $180,000 a year. I don't know what that translates to in euros now, but that would be it was a pretty good salary. It's a good tech executive salary. And he got presented a check, though, for $150,000. And he looked at this check, 150,000, and it equaled pretty much what more than he took home a year after taxes and everything. Now, you'd think he'd spend the rest of the day celebrating. But what happened is the boss said, "Take the rest of the day off, do something nice with the family." And he went home and got into the biggest argument with his wife and ultimately his kids that they'd had in 12 years of marriage. And why does that thing happen? Well, it's the upper limit problem. There was some part of him that didn't believe he deserved that kind of success and that kind of reward and that kind of clear expression of appreciation. And it was as we worked on that issue, I mean, it was real clear in his background. He'd kind of had a rough and tumble background and had succeeded through his engineering brain, but his engineering brain was brilliant at work, but hadn't learned emotional resilience and emotional intelligence and the kinds of things that we need to learn. I always say the personality that gets you to 40 is not the personality that's going to get you to 80. And because you need to often reinvent things that were in your personality getting there in order to enable you to succeed in the long run. So my guy, he went home and he triggered this biggest argument. And it was, as we sorted through it later, it took weeks to kind of get things back to normal with the family. But it involved a conversation where he came and told his family, "Look, I got this big bonus. I guess I don't know how to handle that much success. And I just threw myself into a big argument with you guys." And I always say all problems in communication can be handled in 10 seconds of sweaty conversation. And so oftentimes that sweat inducing conversation involves telling some truth that you don't feel comfortable sharing. Like, I got the bonus. I guess I must have gotten freaked out about that and I took it out on you guys. So I apologize for taking out my own insecurities on you. And so those kind of 10-second communications or 10-minute communications go a long way toward healing things that have even been conflicts for many, many years. I see it all the time here in our office where people have been locked in a conflict for a long time. And then in 10 minutes of sweaty conversation, guided by us, they pop out of that and get back into clear communication again. It's a beautiful thing to see. I never get tired of it, even though I've been watching it happen for 50 some years now.
And yet so many of us are frightened to have those conversations for fear of conflict. You talked about fears. So the first you mentioned there were two really, and they're deeply sinister. These saboteurs. That's so cruel. This inbuilt saboteur that in some way acts as a thermostat to keep us at a level, to limit us to true abundance, to limit us in fully expressing our giftedness, because somewhere deep down we've been programmed to say that, to have this kind of inner voice, inner dialogue, whether that's conscious or subconscious, that we don't deserve this success. So so that's one. What is the second one you mentioned, Gay? You talked about two.
Well, if you look at your limiting beliefs, for example, let's start there. There's only a couple of them. There's one of them that's about, I don't deserve it. And there's another one that's a variant of that called, I don't deserve the spotlight. And oftentimes that comes in families where there's been a golden boy or a golden girl, and then you're not it. And so, like in my family, my brother was the golden boy. He was 8 years older than I was, and I was sort of a midlife mistake, I think, according to my mom. But my brother was definitely the golden boy, and he was always the president of this and the student body president and the star student and everything.
I hear
And
you.
I
Sounds like
remember,
our family.
yeah. Well, I came along. I was the fat, wise ass kid, not the golden boy. And so I made my popularity by being the wittiest person in the class and the one that always said cheeky things to the teacher and got sent to the principal's office and things like that. But if you can get away with that kind of persona and stay out of jail and stay out of the principal's office, you can go a long way in life. So I managed to harness my rebellious persona and put it into turning it into fun and profit.
So, in terms of the inner work, becoming aware that actually we have these kind of inner saboteurs, this committee that has been ingrained, that's potentially holding us back. You reference our zones of competence and this concept of operating in our zone of genius. Can you share with our listeners again who are coming to this for the very first time, okay, what these zones of competence are? And then what I'd love to understand, I mean, ultimately, people will want to know how we can operate and continue to operate consistently in our zone of genius, because I suspect, and we haven't connected this in relation to the research, but those 1% of companies, those 1% of SMEs who are achieving scale, I suspect, and it's an assumption, but that they're being led by people who are, for the most part, operating within their zone of genius. So what are these zones of competence?
Yes. Well, in the Big Leap, I've identified four zones that people operate in. The one you want to not operate in is your zone of incompetence. But surprisingly enough, a lot of people spend time every day doing things they're not good at and don't like to do.
And this
So
is
if you
especially
catch
true in
yourself,
SMEs, because the leaders typically get involved, and especially as the founder SME leaders, they've done everything. They've done everything from kind of put invoices on late in the evening to pack the boxes, deliver the goods. You know, none of these are likely consistent with them being in their zone of genius. So again, this whilst it seems very obvious, why would you operate in your zone of incompetence? I think certainly if you've been leading a startup that's now at the stage where it's ready to scale up, you will have habituated certain behaviors that actually relate to your zone of incompetence.
I think it's mostly that we get programmed so that we don't even realize we've been programmed. You know, like I think I mentioned in the big leap, the day I caught on to this in a big way, I was standing in line at the post office waiting to send a package. And there was maybe 10 or 15 people in the line, and there was one clerk. And it was taking forever. I mean, the line was moving at a glacial pace. And I realized I'd been standing in this line for 15 minutes to send a package that anybody else could have sent, but it was a special package for me because I'd spent 15 minutes of time doing it. And at the time, I charged $1,000 an hour for my coaching services. And so I realized I'm carrying not a $10 thing that I'm sending to my daughter. I'm carrying a $250 package because that's how much time I've invested in this. That was my last day ever standing in a post office line. I realized I could get my assistant to go do that, and it would only cost me 15 minutes of a $15 an hour salary. And so I started looking carefully at my life, and I weeded out all the things that I don't like to do or I'm not good at. So if something breaks now, I don't attempt to repair it. I'm hopeless with tools and machinery. My wife, Katie, and I have been together for 45 years now, and she comes from a family of engineers, and she can fix anything. And so the joke around here is if she ever sees me with a tool in my hand, she runs and gets it out of my hand quickly before I hurt somebody, including myself. And so I just stay out of that. I don't do that. I can operate a computer. I can operate my e-bike. I can operate my car, but by golly, I don't fix them. So I stay out of that completely. I also stay out of my zone of competence. And the second zone you want to look at carefully is when you're doing things you're good at or can do, but somebody else could do them just as well. So go through your activities and weed out all of those. That leaves you with two primo zones, your zone of excellence and your zone of genius. Your zone of excellence is when you're functioning at a high level, you're being well paid, you're getting lots of good attaboys and attagirls, and yay for you and all of that. And yet, that zone of excellence is where a lot of the goodies come from, but it's also a gigantic sticky trap that you can get into if you stay in it too long. And what I mean by that is that the more you stay in your zone of excellence, the more people want you to stay in your zone of excellence because your family wants you to stay there because you're bringing home the bucks and your company wants you to be there. And so everybody's rewarding you for being in your zone of excellence. The problem with that, and I've worked with so many people now that it's pretty easy to spot it coming on. It often comes on in a successful executive's life somewhere around 40, 42, 45 along in there, where there builds this longing for genius, this longing to live in your zone of genius. And the genius zone is based on two factors. You're doing what you love to do, and you're doing what makes your biggest contribution to the world around you. And one of my old mentors, Abraham Maslow, back 50 years ago, he said it doesn't matter if you're doing something for 5 people, like you're making a great soup for 5 people. If your creativity is engaged in making a soup for 5 people, that equals writing a symphony that'll be listened to maybe by 5 million people because it's drawing on the same inner resources. And see, in my opinion, now after having worked with folks for over 50 years now, is that we all have this calling to genius inside ourselves. We want to operate in our genius zone. It's just something wired in as human beings. We want to be the very best we can be at the thing we're best at. And so to do that, you need to ask yourself a couple of big questions. And I started asking these questions, a long time ago, and it helped me weed out everything that wasn't in my genius zone. But one big question is, what do I most love to do? When I'm doing it, I feel complete. I feel satisfied. I feel at peace. I feel like my energy is being engaged. Some people call it being in the flow. But what it is basically is you're doing something you most love to do. The second factor to ask yourself is, am I doing something that has the largest possible impact? Because for me, big impact is not just about reaping the financial rewards, which is fantastic. And I created my own fortune through, first of all, book royalties, but also through investments. Way back in the 70s, I saw the bull market coming, and I started doing things like buying Dell stock and buying all the kinds of things that would uh, later prosper. And I started buying gold back then because I foresaw a day when gold would be worth a lot more than the $300 it was when I started buying it. So um, it's all about though finding where you prosper, finding out the niche that you prosper in. So I think most entrepreneurs uh, are smart about wanting to create more than one stream of income. I put my attention on creating a number of different streams of income. And then later, in around 2003, I created a company that was based on what I love to do and what I thought would make a huge um, contribution. And I designed it specifically to be sold to a big company once I got it running well. And so it's a classic entrepreneurial tale. I identified a group of people around the world that love to watch inspirational movies. And now you can find a streaming service that probably streams them 28 hours a day. But in those days, all we had was DVDs. And so I kind of created a niche market, Netflix, where I got 25,000 people around the world to pay $20 a month to get a subscription to my business, which was called the Spiritual Cinema Circle. And it took off very well. And so I was able to sell it in a few years for a little over $10 million. And I cite that number because it started out with a 10-second inner insight. One morning after meditation, I'm a daily meditator. I've meditated every day for 50 years now, 52 years actually. And so one day after meditation, about 5 a.m. in the morning, I got an insight. A movie producer friend of mine and I, Stephen Simon, had tried to pitch inspirational movies to Hollywood. We owned the rights at the time to a couple of big New Age bestsellers like Conversations with God and things like that. And we got thrown out of every office in Hollywood because no people, people want to watch big comic book things where things blow up. They don't want to watch inspirational movies. Well, here's the magic, though, Brendan, is there were all these great movies that were being shown at film festivals in a room full of 150 people, but then nobody ever saw them again because Hollywood didn't pick them up. And we sent out a scout, and within a few months had collected dozens of movies that were really the great kind of movies that people wanted to touch their hearts and touch their spirit. And so that 10-second insight was, wow, we can't get any movies made in Hollywood. Let's go out and get the movies and send them to people on DVDs as a subscription. Boing. That took 10 seconds. So when I got finished meditation, I called Stephen and I said, Stephen, I just had this wild idea. And he said, yeah. And I explained it to him. Once again, it didn't take long to explain it to him. And he said, wow, I'm in. And so we created this. And within maybe a few months after we launched, we had enough profitability that we had three Wall Street outfits calling us up and saying, "You guys want some money? You guys want to, And so it was a big entrepreneurial success, and it got big enough so that I couldn't have run it anymore. I had to go out and get myself a Harvard MBA to pull the levers and everything like that. And so as quickly as possible, I got out of having to do anything daily with that and moved it on and ultimately sold it to a big company that knows how to run big operations. And so the thing I want to underline though, 10 seconds to 10 million. And I think a lot of us overlook those opportunities, and a lot of us overlook also the need to kind of go deeply inside through meditation or communing with nature or something that takes you beyond this moment into an exalted experience of life.
So there are a number of things there. Inspiration is perishable, so it's a case of acting on it whenever that inspiration comes. Literally 10 seconds of inspiration after a period of meditation struck you to act, and you created something quite significant, but also recognized, which is the essence of scaling, that you needed to build something that ultimately could operate without you. And this speaks to the challenge that I hear and that I see, that I witness with many of the entrepreneurs, the SME leaders within our own community, is this fear of letting go. So they stay doing the things in their fear of incompetence, because it's a case of, well, if I don't do it, who else will? Or I won't spend the money to get the assistant to do it. I spend too much time in my zone of competence, far too much time in my zone of excellence, and I have no real understanding of what it is to be in my zone of genius. There's a paradox here that I certainly find, is that when you're operating in your zone of genius, it's incredibly enjoyable. You've talked about the flow state. And I think certainly in this part of the world, we associate work with attrition, with friction, with some sense of kind of labor, that it's sweat and toil and it must feel hard, when in fact the paradoxical concept of genius is the fact that it won't feel hard to you. And ultimately, we don't value or tend not to value it because it's not hard. So how do we really get the leaders listening to this to stop in their tracks, to take some practical action today, to actually recognize what their zone of genius actually is, and to do something that moves them away from zone of incompetence, competence, and excellence to really get into this. And just to wrap that piece up, because there's an insight here. You were coaching. You knew your hourly rate was $1,000 an hour. You recognized immediately when you were standing in that line for 15 minutes that actually this has just cost me, the opportunity cost of me standing here is $250. What would you say to leaders who are not charging by the hour, who have got a manufacturing business and they are not aware of their hourly rate and the fact that they should be delegating anything that is less than that hourly rate? I've pulled a lot together there, but that's what I'm hearing.
Yes, well, one of the things that I think is so important is to, first of all, get comfortable with quickly looking inside, and specifically looking inside to see if you have symptoms of any of the three big emotions that get us in trouble. One is inability to speak easily about your fear, inability to speak easily about your sadness or grief, and inability to speak easily about your anger. So it's easy to say, I'm angry to someone. It's easy to say, I feel sad right now. It's easy to say, I feel scared. It's easy for me to say that because I've had 50 years of practice. But 50 years ago, I was in a kind of a disastrously toxic relationship with a woman that I was with for several years. And, when the counselor would ask me, well, what are you feeling, Mr. Hendricks? And I would say, I don't know. Why do people keep asking me that all the time? But now, if somebody asks me, are you feeling sad right now? I check in and I say, yeah. Or I check in and I say, no, I'm feeling angry right now. Or I check in and I say, I'm feeling scared. But it involves this quick check in. And that check in is facilitated if we make friends, if we make a point of making friends with our inner world, with learning to accept and love and appreciate even upper limit problems. Because, see, upper limit problems, even though they keep us out of the flow, they keep us safe because the mind goes, oh my gosh, I like with lottery winners, their unconscious goes, oh my gosh, I've been poor all my life. Now I've got $10 million. And it trips a switch. And in the Big Leap, I did a lot of research on lottery winners. And as you probably read, a good many of them, a horrifyingly large number of them, are worse off after a year or two after winning the big money. They made bad investments, or they went to the dog track, or they went to the this or the that. Or the worst example is the fellow who went down to the bar that night with $545,000 stuffed in his raincoat and got drunk and got his $545,000 liberated from him by some people at the bar. And so that's a real big, quick upper limit problem. You get your check. Wow, 500 grand in my pocket. I'm going to be the king of the bar tonight. Uh-oh. Suddenly, interestingly enough, the gentleman that happened to had already won an earlier lottery of something like $1 million, and it didn't trip his switch. But winning the $10 million one tripped his upper limit switch, and then he went out and sabotaged himself. Ended up getting divorced, ended up one of his children got into a big drug habit and spent years in rehab. And a lot of these things can be dealt with if, like my mom, I mentioned she was a newspaper writer. She wasn't a psychologist, but she was a kind of a brilliant psychologist in a way, because one time when I was a little boy, I was sort of an only child because my brother was so much older. By the time I kind of got up into being 7 or 8 years old, he was already off and gone. And so I was kind of an only child a lot of the time because he was doing things that were more teenage kind of things. And but one time I woke up in the middle of the night and I thought I saw a monster in the drapes. They were sort of blowing in a certain way, I guess. And so I ran in and I told my mother that there was a monster in the bedroom and I needed help. And so, brilliant psychologist that she was, she got a little flashlight and gave it to me and said, let's go in and just see what it is, and here, you use the flashlight. And so we went in with a little flashlight, and then I saw that what was actually happening was the drapes were blowing in a certain way. And so she said, keep the flashlight, and if you see it again, just see what it is first before you come wake me up. And my mother was always living on a deadline. You never saw my mother without a cigarette in her mouth and a cup of coffee and bang, 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 bang on an old Underwood typewriter. And so being on a perpetual deadline, she didn't want to have some little kid waking her up in the middle of the night talking about monsters. But anyway, it's the same process that I want my executives to use. Just take a little mental, physical snapshot of what you're feeling inside right now. If you're in the flow, Great, enjoy it. Do what you're doing. Do more of what you're doing. If you're feeling you're being used well, you feel like George Bernard Shaw said at 104 years old. I think he said, "I want to be fully used up when I end my life. I want to be using every aspect of my genius." This is me talking, not George Bernard Shaw. But one thing that, I know I probably look like an old guy, but I feel just as turned on about helping people with their genius as I did 50 years ago when I first started working with people. It's still just as exciting to me to watch the lights come on in somebody, to say, "Oh, wow, I could be doing more of what I love to do." I mean, that's like eating that ice cream sundae, and I never get tired of it.
I love this, and I love your passion, Gay. I mean, what our listeners won't appreciate is that you're 80 years of age and you speak so passionately about this work. It's clear that you've done the work, that you've supported others in doing the work, and that you have witnessed significant success as a result of that. I love this metaphor of the flashlight, our own, what is the equivalent of our own flashlight here that we need to shine on these upper limits, some of them being incredibly sinister in terms of I don't deserve this success, so ultimately we will find ways of self-sabotaging. Now, for those who are listening and saying, who have stuck with us, we're almost an hour in, who's saying, guys, that's all sounding wonderful, but actually I do deserve success. But the reality is, out in the market at the moment, it's tough. I can't get the people. I'm struggling to get access to finance. I've just lost one of my senior hires, and you guys are talking there about, me not deserving success. I do deserve success, but here are these realities. So how do we expose those with the metaphorical flashlight for what they really are, Gay? What can we share with our listeners? Because these are things that I hear constantly.
I use the analogy, Brendan, of the automatic pilot on an aircraft. If you get on the plane in Dublin and you want to go to New York, then the pilot feeds in the coordinates, and the plane doesn't get there in a straight line, in a sense. It gets there by a little move that human beings are not good at, but machines are very good at. What happens inside the automatic pilot is it says, "Oh, we're drifting a little to the right. Let's correct to the left. Oh, we're drifting a little to the left. Let's correct to the right. Oh, we're drifting a little to the right. Let's correct back toward the center." And so it gets you from Dublin to New York by being wrong 99.9% of the time, because it has the ability to correct. It has a mechanism in it. And human beings, executives, anywhere. I started working with juvenile delinquents 50 some years ago. Those were my first clients. And now I work with sometimes juvenile delinquents that have attained great success and own a very large business. But they've learned how to harness whatever energies they were frittering away in their early part of their life. And they've learned to put it on, here's what I want. And, oh, I'm drifting. Let me get back to focusing on what I want. Oh, we're drifting a little bit. Let's get, and learning how to come back to center without making a big drama about it. A lot of times human beings make a big drama when they wander off course. They're not doing what they want to do. They're not doing what they love to do. And so they spend their life complaining about it. And they're in every business. If you have, 5 or more employees, you probably see one of them that's a habitual griper. But that's oftentimes corrected, though, when we learn how to operate out of our genius zone. Because there are people in my business now, like my administrative director, Margaret. She is the most brilliant person at organizing things, and she has no drama. She does things that would drive me nuts. And if I tried to do them, lists of things to be organized and things like that, and I'd run screaming out the door if I had to do that. But she does it. in a calm, easygoing way, and she does it brilliantly. And every year for the last 15 years, she comes in and asks for a little raise. We give her a nice raise. She comes back and she does it again for a whole year. To me, I'm the luckiest man on earth because I've got somebody in my organization that can do that. But I always say that bad hires eat up more than 50% of your entrepreneurial time. And so take good care about who you hire and put a lot of thought into it, and be very wary of making some of the mistakes that entrepreneurs make, which is, and I've done a couple of them myself. I hired a family member once to do a big multi-$100,000 task that then messed up. And then I had a hard time dealing with family members and also dealing with the fact that this person had messed up, and there's all sorts of heartbreak that can happen through bad hires and or what I call low hires, where you hire somebody out of some low part of yourself. You feel depressed about the fact that the bookkeeping doesn't work. So you hire somebody out of that feeling of depression, and it never works well. That we need to hire people out of the fullness of ourselves, not out of the places that we are deaf, dumb, and blind to ourselves, the places we're cut off from.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is, again, back to the earlier advice, is in relation to hiring. And I always say, hiring a great person for your team is the greatest gift that you can give to them. Hire from a place of inspiration, not from a place of desperation. And what our listeners should understand here is, what you are incompetent at, somebody else is operating from their zone of genius. So what you've just described in relation to Margaret, who is just incredibly gifted at all of the administration requirements of your business, you would pull your teeth out if that was something that you had to do. And by doing those things, you're actually preventing others from being a recipient of your giftedness. So again, there's so much in this, and I want to bring it to a place that's hugely practical for our listeners, guys. So we've covered a lot. The last hour has flown. What would you encourage our listeners to do, having just heard us for the last hour? Is it get out a pen and a piece of paper, start to kind of take stock of their activities, what they are doing, mark them zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4. What do you encourage leaders to do who you're coaching, who are clearly operating from a place other than their zone of genius?
Well, one thing we do here, and I recommend that everybody do, is when executives come to us to work with us for a day, the first thing we ask them to do is go in a little room where there's nothing else going on except a clock. And we ask them to focus in on asking a question over and over, and then taking 3 easy breaths before they ask it again. And the question is, what do I most love to do? And then 3 easy breaths of open space, just to let your being contemplate that. And then come back to the question again. Don't focus on the answers. Just focus on living in that question. What do I most love to do? And because I want people to live in that question their whole lives. The second thing is to get used to opening up space in your mind and your body through your breathing or meditation or whatever you like to do, from going for a run or whatever, but something that opens up more space in yourself. The reason I meditate every day is because for 20 minutes or so, I go inside, and within a very short period of time, I feel this easy flow and a big open space. And then that lasts after I finish meditating. So even though I meditated a couple of hours ago, now I can still feel that sense of open space in my body. So find things that increase that amount of open space, because that comes along with being open to your genius zone. So the more you can open to what you most love to do. The second thing, focus on opening up more space in yourself. The third thing is get in the habit of impeccably speaking honestly and uh, taking responsibility in an effective way. Speaking honestly is saying, I don't know what to do right now, or I'm feeling a nervous sensation in the pit of my stomach, or I can't think of a good answer for that right now. Let me think on that for a moment. So those kind of authentic statements that never take longer than 10 seconds to say, those are a key to learning how to speak in an open-hearted, open-minded, easygoing way about inner kinds of things. The second thing is that many people confuse taking responsibility with blame. When they're asking somebody else or upbraiding somebody else for not taking responsibility, they're saying, you didn't take responsibility for that. And often we use blame in ourselves too. Oh no, here I go again doing, oh no. And so what we need to do is to take a conscious form of responsibility that doesn't involve blame. So, why did I have that argument with Sam again this week that I had last week? You're taking responsibility for it, but you're taking responsibility in a friendly, easygoing, non-blameful way. And I've found after 50-some years of working with people that that works a lot better than blame.
I feel just incredibly blessed to have you share this directly, having been a student of the book for so many years, Gay. We referenced earlier, you're 80 years of age. I'm going to put you up on my visions board. I'm 50 this year, which suggests that, I've three at least good decades in front of me, I hope. And I think an upper limit that many leaders that I certainly come into contact with, let's say in midlife, they feel, they're kind of starting to wind down. They're thinking, well, I'll leave it for someone else. But the reality is, if you're looking after yourself, which you clearly are, by the time you've reached midlife, you've got all of this experience, which you can wrap up in wisdom from the decades previous. And imagine then taking that wisdom and applying it as a multiplying factor for the impact that you can have in the world for kind of the decades in front of you. And the passion and energy you bring to this topic is just, I can feel it, it's palpable. Given the fact that you've been 80 years on this planet, you shared so much wisdom today, but could you share with our listeners three timeless takeaways?
Yes. When people come to the Hendricks Institute and graduate from certain programs of ours, they get a little wristband that has three words on it. And those three words are words that have boundless possibilities. It says breathe, move, love. And what I'm getting at with breathing is learning how to learn about your inner body. I see the results of people all the time not doing that, especially when they're around 40 or so. In developmental psychology, we say your 30s, your job is to experiment and find your life in your 20s and 30s. And in your 40s, you build your life. And in your 50s, you succeed and enjoy your life if you work it right. And some people flame out, though, at 40 because they don't do this inner move that I'm talking about. They stay focused on the outside and think they can solve the problem they have by working 18 hours a day by working 19 and a half hours a day, and it never works out well. A second thing is to really get good at using your full resources, which says move on the bracelet. But what we mean by that is everything is movement. And so if you go inside and feel fear, that's a bunch of little things doing something. And then you want to ask the question, why are they doing that? What am I scared about right now? And so learning how to appreciate life as movement is a very key thing. A third thing, it says love, because ultimately everything does involve our abilities to love and accept ourselves, and in so doing, grow our ability to love and accept others. And my particular take on that is also then if you open up every day to more and more of your genius, then that takes care of a lot of other problems, because people, when they're operating in their genius, they feel good and they tend not to make trouble for themselves and other people. They just do more of what they're doing. And so the happiest people I know on this planet are people that are living in their genius zones. And I feel like I always say I have the best inbox in town, because people write me about their big leaps from all over the world. And so I get to open my inbox anytime I want and read about people operating in their genius zone. It's always heart moving to me. I still love it.
I absolutely love those and resonate strongly with me. I became a breathwork instructor, um, a, a certified instructor of the Wim Hof method some years ago. It just found it profoundly impactful. Movement is something I try to get into my life every single day. I train first thing in the morning. I went for a lovely walk in the woods before I come on to host the podcast today. And love, I mean, we should all love what we do, and I think that there's profound importance in asking that question. Do you truly love what you do? And in the context of leading the business that you currently are leading, do you truly love this business? Do you love the role that you're in? And it's fine if you're in the CEO role that you actually recognize the fact, I do not love being a CEO. I love the business, I love my customers, but I don't love being the CEO. You can delegate that to someone whose zone of genius that is, and you have the privilege of actually looking at this business and taking the parts that allow you to express your zone of genius and delegate away everything else. So Gay, 80 years of age, you've delivered so much value into the world. What's next for you? What does the next decade hold?
Oh, well, I'm putting a lot of my attention, both Katie and I are putting a lot of our attention into developing our nonprofit foundation. We have a nonprofit foundation called the Foundation for Conscious Living, and it gives grants to people for all sorts of things. But it's given little grants to make documentary movies, and it's given grants to do research. We're doing a research project right now, adapting our materials to a special little AI portal that people can consult if they want to know how we think about something or what we might do in a coaching situation. So I'm having a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun for the first 60 years of my life making money, and for the last 20 years, I've had a lot of fun giving it away.
Wonderful. Gay, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the value that you put out into the world, for the way that you put it out. This has just been just a wonderful conversation. You're like the uncle I never had that I would love to have had. Thank you for your energy, for your wisdom, and for showing up the way you showed up this morning. If I can show up to the world at 80 years of age the way you have at 6:30 across the world this morning and deliver such value, I will be a very, very proud person. If people want to find out more about your work, where best to connect with you?
It's easy to get us. We're at hendricks.com, hendricks.com, and also our Foundation for Conscious Living website. That's easy to find also, but start with hendricks.com because that's kind of the jumping off place to the different things we do. And of course, all of our books are available out there. We have a new one called Your Big Leap Year, which is a day at a time book, 366 days of big leap work. 366 because it's a big leap year that occasionally we have. So, of course, we have to have a big leap day. But that's our latest one. And what else are we doing? Having a good time. I just have finished rehabbing a broken leg over the past year or so. I had a slip and fall out by my swimming pool on a rainy day, and I fractured my femur and have gone through a big rehab process of getting a new hip and had to walk with a cane for a long time. And I'm about 2 months into walking on my own two legs now, and it really feels great.
Well, good on you. I wish you every success with a full recovery. I suspect you'll be running again in no time, and hopefully, I get the opportunity to share a pint of Guinness with you whenever you're this side of the world again. You're a man after my own heart, and in the context that you only will drink Guinness on this side of the world as it doesn't travel well. So hopefully, we get an opportunity some stage in the future.
Well, I hope so. If you come to Southern California, I definitely won't buy you a Guinness though, because you won't like the way they taste over here.
Thank you, Gay. Look, again, for everything that you do. Take
All
care.
right. Well, blessings to you. Thanks for hearing me out this morning.